Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. City Limits is a New York City news and policy magazine. It covers the government and neighborhoods of the city, making it the dream magazine for activists and advocates. And Alyssa Katz is its ideal editor because of her special flair and her experience. So let's talk a little bit about this experience. It was started in a different direction. You're a New Yorker.
I'm a New Yorker.
And where'd you grow up?
Manhattan, on the Upper East Side. And I grew up in the 1970s in a rent-controlled apartment. And I think that was really pivotal to my experience growing up as a New Yorker. My dad was a freelance writer. My mother worked for the state. And it was a kind of humble existence in what is now considered a big luxury environment. It wasn't that then.
So you went to public school in the city?
Yeah, I went to PS6, Hunter College High School.
That was lucky, huh?
Yeah, it was great. It was all in the neighborhood.
Right.
Got to walk.
And then college, and then came back. And when did you decide you were going to write or be an editor or do whatever you were doing?
Yeah, I think it was in college. I worked for the Michigan Daily. I went to the University of Michigan. I loved Ann Arbor, great town, and learned on the job, learned doing it, and was hooked. I was the arts editor there, and I spent the beginning of my career as an arts journalist. I wrote for the Village Voice, for The Nation, for Spin magazine, wrote about movies, television, music, loved it.
You came to movies because of a family tradition or interest, right?
Yes,
you grew up interested? Did you go to the movies all the time?
Yeah, I did. Well, I grew up, my father was Ephraim Katz, and he wrote a book called the Film Encyclopedia that for film buffs is a Bible. It has biographies of filmmakers, actors, and it's a one-stop reference. And
does it get updated all the time?
It does. My dad's died about 13 years ago, but it's updated by new people. And I was my dad's research assistant growing up, so I was immersed in this. I was into the Lucas and Spielberg kind of movies. Saw Star Wars repeatedly, and I think that those films actually inform my work a lot as a journalist, because I learned very early on how important it is to tell stories that are really powerful and motivating to people, where they can understand a larger picture and a larger narrative that helps the world make sense.
So how did you go from entertainment to public policy and social policy?
I had always been interested in it, and also very intimidated. It's very easy to go to the movies, watch TV, and very privately write about it. Writing about social policy requires engagement with the world and some very complicated issues, and I think I was appropriately intimidated, didn't have the arrogance that I could understand it right away. And so I spent a long time observing it, reading about it. Would read people like Jane Jacobs, would read the papers, sort of figure out politics and social justice, and keep an eye on it. And in my mid-20s, I got a job at Spin magazine, and started out covering entertainment, but a job opened up covering politics and social issues. It was the 1996 elections were coming up, edited articles about chain gangs in Alabama. So I was really hooked on that, and that kind of narrative journalism that kind of tried to explain the world.
So you went from Spin then right to City Limits?
No, I freelanced for a while. I thought, okay, I like this. I'd like to do this, and so I started writing about social justice issues. Wrote for the Village Voice, The Nation, and I also spent a year writing a newsletter for the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy, now known as the Center for Reproductive Rights. And I wanted an immersion in, how the courts and legislatures made their decisions about reproductive rights issues, and that was what I covered.
Was your family always interested in the community as well as in movies?
Not at all,
No.
and that was, I think, why it took me a little while to
But Hunter High School?
Hunter High School was very activist. I was a bit aloof from all of that. I was kind of
interesting,
on my own.
because usually it's an inherited interest or trait.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think my father had been involved in Israel, which is where he was from. But as an immigrant here, I think it was a little harder to plug in, and he just wasn't motivated.
So you're at City Limits.
Yes.
Tell us what City Limits is, or what it tries to be.
City Limits is a bi-monthly now magazine and weekly email news service that covers the issues that really matter to New York City neighborhoods. And it's been around for 30 years and has evolved in many incarnations. Right now, we really try to tell the untold stories and that really explain how power and policy really work. And bottom line is it's always about what really affects New Yorkers in the aggregate, not an elite group of New Yorkers, not people who have dollars that advertisers want to capture, but what is the public interest and how can we articulate that?
And how does it get supported?
It's a combination. We have advertising, we have foundation grants, we have donors. So we try to keep a diverse
and
base.
subscriptions.
Subscriptions.
Is it sold on the newsstands?
It is. We're currently changing our distribution company. So this month it's a little bit difficult to find. If you want to find City Limits, the best thing to do is email us at subscribe@citylimits.org, and we can send a sample copy to you.
And if you want to look at it, you go to citylimits.org.
That's right, citylimits.org. It's the homepage, and our entire archives are up, plus selected articles.
Do you know who started the magazine and why it started?
It was started, I believe, by the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development, which is currently exists, and I think ANHD, and I believe the Pratt Institute as well. And it started as a magazine for people who were rebuilding city neighborhoods. There was a lot of abandonment.
So when was this? It was 20 years ago.
30 years ago,
1976,
so 29 years ago. And, at the time, of course, so many city neighborhoods were being abandoned and blighted. And there was a real, from what I've been told, I was young then, there was a real sense...
Don't have to boast about that.
there was a real sense of powerlessness about what to do. And at the same time, there were activists locally who were really trying to figure out how to respond, how to marshal government money, how to stop landlords from burning buildings, and how to organize and mobilize people in neighborhoods to reclaim those buildings. So it's a really amazing movement that has since then turned into, there's no other word for it, an industry.
And now the issues are the flip side. There's too much development going into some of the neighborhoods.
That's right. In New York City, that's certainly the issue, and it's been interesting, both in terms of our coverage and in terms of the work of people who've spent their careers trying to do what's best for neighborhoods, to really retool their organizations and their strategies to deal with the current issues. And
what does the magazine consider to be the major challenges facing the city?
Housing right now, and I think jobs and work, and what you increasingly see on the jobs front is a bifurcation of the economy. That's certainly true nationally, but it's very acute in New York, where I think you have very strong economy and job prospects for people who have college education, strong skills, and who are working in the city's major industries. But you have a large portion of the population that's not connected with the current economy, doesn't have the training, doesn't have the connections. So,
and it's especially difficult as we have an influx of immigrants who are not who aren't speaking the language, or whose skills are hard to use because of their language difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't done a lot of analysis to figure out if new immigrants, the newest immigrants, are really in the same boat as sort of this large portion of the city population that may have been in New York City for several generations and are finding that it's just not possible to really keep it going. And one story that City Limits did recently was about how many people are leaving New York City because they simply can't afford it. They want to have the American dream, a house, a backyard, and are leaving.
And where are they going? And who are they?
Who are they? Well, the story in particular that we did looked at Puerto Rican migration to Pennsylvania, not commuters, but people who are living in places like Allentown. And our reporter, Debbie Nathan, spent time there to understand why they left and what their lives are like in Allentown. And she looked at census data that found that 10% of the city's Puerto Ricans have left in, I think it was the decade between the 1990 and 2000.
So they go to Pennsylvania and other places? Or
Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Florida. There's an out-migration.
And what did she find in Pennsylvania? Are they working there?
Some people are, some people aren't. I think people are continuing to struggle, and they're quite isolated.
Right. So do they find their lives any better because they're able to afford the housing?
I think some people do. I don't think there are people there who are wondering why they came or going back. I think that you see, for instance, C-Town, the grocery store that's New York fixture, has just opened a place in Allentown. So you're actually seeing a recreation of New York communities out in Pennsylvania.
And so when we lose these people, who comes in and fills their spot?
You know, I haven't done a demographic analysis, but you look around us, and certainly New York has become a beacon for young professionals. It has been for a long time, but I think not only post the Giuliani, crime crackdowns and neighborhood cleanups, but also I think post 9/11, that sort of publicity that New York got, it suddenly became America's city, and it's just the influx does not stop.
Now, so what other issues?
What other issues? So housing.
We'll come back to the housing because
Okay.
the new issue is a lot about housing in your article. Let's come back to that in a minute. But
Sure.
What else?
What other issues right now? And how we just. Gosh, let me think. In healthcare, we've been looking a lot at Medicaid and what the state legislative reforms might mean for people who are depending on it. We're still trying to cover public assistance, which is challenging because you're seeing there's such the constituency for that has really diminished a lot. You have a few activist organizations that are really focused on it. But overall, I think that whole discussion's moved on to how can we get people plugged into jobs, not how can we actually make welfare programs work, but that's still an important issue.
So the emphasis now is we've basically accepted as a society that we've got to find jobs, that we're not going to have the welfare programs that we used to have. To talk about welfare benefits for people on welfare is something that's not finding an audience, a receptive audience.
That's way off the table.
Do you think that's good or bad?
I think it's good in the sense that it is important to really talk, about how are we going to get people into jobs, because that is what the policies are. I just think that it does not give us or government a free pass to neglect how those systems
Has the magazine looked at education?
Yeah, we have. One story we just did actually is about there's actually a number of these new small schools that in fact are getting very, very little oversight from Tweed right now. They're actually
Tweed being the head of the Department of Education.
That's right, and
the building in which the people who run it.
That's right, exactly. Chancellor Joel Klein and his people. And what's interesting is, I think what everyone's really heard about is how much the system is really being centralized right now. But what they're doing is actually allowing a small number of principals to run their schools without any oversight, and the idea is that they want to make New York's being a principal in New York schools really attractive to entrepreneurs who have innovative ideas about how to run schools, and they want to let them free to really put those to work.
So do you think that's a good idea?
It sounds really promising.
It's something that we had asked for, right? To relieve them from the bureaucracy and all of the processes. And yet, it's a very mixed bag so far.
Well, it is a very mixed bag so far in terms of how the schools are performing. But I think that these schools in particular, what you're actually seeing is the people behind this are the same folks who were behind the effort in the 1990s to...
They're the creative, imaginative people, right? Who are trying to break out of the system.
Exactly. And what's really amazing is that they have managed to convince the people in charge of the education system that the future of recruiting good principals and creating innovative schools that parents will want to send their children to depends on them giving
That's a very interesting viewpoint about it, because it's a more optimistic viewpoint than you get from other people who say, oh, we're fooling around and it's just terrible situation and everything else.
Yeah.
It's not as chaotic. You're trying to pluck the people who are the most creative out, so it's a mixed bag.
Well, absolutely. I think they just decided that they have to create environments where there is really strong leadership. It's almost like this kind of CEO concept that there's going to be somebody there who will just create an environment that people will want to be part of, and it seems to be working. Let's
go back to the housing. This issue. There's a new proposal to change the city zoning regulations.
That's right.
Which has always befuddled me. I mean, the city zoning codes would fill almost a room, right?
Yeah, they would.
With all the records and the changes. And I've always been fascinated that the people who work for the city and write the code then become the attorneys and the developers outside who then use the code in order to do their business.
That's right.
And it's so complicated that people really can't understand it. And the question has always been with me, is there ever a chance to revise the whole city code? I mean, we haven't had a master plan for anything for decades.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of years ago there was some talk about revisiting the master plan, and I can't remember why that got scuttled. But what the Bloomberg administration is doing right now, which is an exciting development, is that they're committing to rezoning certain, well, there are two sets of things going on. One is actually what's known as downzoning, taking areas in the outer boroughs, Queens, Staten Island, and actually making them more suburban, which I think is Bloomberg's way of trying to court that constituency come election time, because it's not exactly fair to tell certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn or Manhattan that they have to have more density and more crowding, but neighborhoods in Queens and Staten Island can have a nice bucolic environment. But politically, that's what sells there. The other thing that they're doing, and what I've been focusing on in our coverage, is taking industrial areas in Brooklyn and on the far west side of Manhattan and rezoning them into new residential neighborhoods.
So that becomes Greenpoint.
It's Greenpoint and Williamsburg, mostly on the waterfront, but also somewhat inland. And then the far west side, which is
parts of Chelsea, or mostly Clinton?
There's sort of separate. There's the Chelsea plan, and there's also far west side, which is Clinton, and that whole Hudson Yards area where the Jets Stadium may or may not be built.
That's so unfortunate because it seems to me on the west side it's so mixed in with the Jets Stadium that people who might be considering the plan are put off by the whole discussion.
I think that's
suspicious
true.
Of it.
What's interesting is I think it gives activists in the neighborhood who are concerned about the cost of housing some leverage in terms of convincing the city that it's important to provide more housing, more affordable housing, and so on. And that that's really a crucial part of these redevelopment plans. Is there's new housing development going up. It's going to be in the Williamsburg waterfront. The plan is to have luxury high rises. Amanda Burden, the city planning commissioner, talks about having a undulating wall of high rises along the waterfront, and it sounds spectacular, and it will be, but people in the neighborhood are asking, for affordable housing as part of that.
Right.
The city, to its credit, has come up with a plan that would reward developers there for including a significant portion of affordable housing in those new in those new buildings. And that's known as inclusionary zoning, the idea that you zone and require or incentivize developers to include 20%, 30%, 40% of apartments affordable to people who are middle income, lower income. The question is, what exactly is that plan going to look like?
Now, what's the difference between the 80-20 plan that we have in Manhattan and that plan?
The difference is the 80-20 plan is based around the tax code. It's available to any developer in certain parts of Manhattan who wants to use it. It's also available in the outer boroughs, but there they just get the tax credit and actually don't have to provide affordable apartments for it.
How does that happen?
It's just the way it's written. They get the break.
So what happens in Manhattan, and I can't remember now what the limit is, but most of that development has been. I don't even remember the area, but I know it's in the area that I live in Lincoln Center area a lot. Is the 20% of the housing is set aside for people of low or moderate income housing, and those people are chosen by a lottery. You apply, and then it's a lottery. But because it's tax-based, it's only good for the length of the tax incentive.
That's right.
So then after 20 years or whatever it is, then that apartment reverts back to market price.
That's right. And I'm not sure if it does that upon the vacancy of the apartment.
Right.
But
it happens. So but you think that the incentive now that's proposed will be permanent?
The city's pledged that, and I think that's a huge leap forward. They're saying that they want to, they think that developers will take these incentives and will build the apartments, and that, two, they will be permanently affordable.
So what is the incentive based on? A height of a building? Is it increasing the density?
Yeah, the idea is that developers could build taller buildings, bigger buildings than they would otherwise without including the affordable apartments. So technically it's their choice, but the idea is that it will be so financially preferable to build the extra units that everyone will do it.
And so what are we talking about? How many thousands? 5,000 apartments in the two areas
they
together?
actually have not come up with target numbers for the far west side, but Williamsburg, Greenpoint, they're talking about 2,600 affordable units. But you have to keep in mind, the city's own environmental impact statement for this rezoning anticipates that at least 2,500 people will be displaced as a result of this because the housing in that area will be too expensive, and that local residents will have to find other places to live. So when you really look at what impact, and that's probably an underestimate. Right. So when you look at the impact of all this new luxury development that's likely to happen in Williamsburg on poor people who've lived in this area.
So it's not adding any more housing.
Well, it is adding more housing. One thing to keep in mind is that there's a premise that the Bloomberg administration has operated on for a while, which is that any additional housing is helpful. And there's no doubt that to a certain extent that's true.
Anybody would agree to that. We need more housing.
We need more housing.
More affordable housing.
Well, we need more housing. The issue is that housing is just not affordable or accessible to low-income people.
It's not even affordable, accessible to
middle-income people.
Right, or what? It depends on what we call middle income also.
Right. Well, exactly, but there's been this understanding that it would all kind of trickle down somehow.
Yeah.
And I think that with the arrival of the new HPD commissioner, Sean Donovan, I think that it's become, I think that there's a new understanding that trickle down isn't feasible and does not work in the New York City economy. So they're now focusing more and more on making sure there are apartments that are going to be affordable and that it won't just be trickle down.
But it's hard to design regulations, and I'm careful not to say legislation, around personalities or the person that's there, because those people change, and then we can find always a way to circumvent or an original incentive. See, I've gotten so cynical that I can't stand it.
But that's an appropriate
it's true. So
concern.
Are the advocates and the community groups supporting this or not supporting it?
No, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, what they want is guarantees of some kind. I think community groups are saying that they want outright mandates. 40%, 30% of the units will be affordable, sign here, end of story. I think that there are others who, as long as there's guarantees of some kind, commitments, some kind of pledge that's enforceable, that's enough. But there's this idea that we can't just leave it up to this incentive program because Bloomberg leaves, Donovan leaves, it's over.
We change it.
Right.
Now, it does come, it's not legislation, but it does come for public review in the ULURP process, the Uniform Review,
Land Use Review
process, which means that it will go to the city planning, it goes to the community boards, it goes to the city planning commission, it goes back to the city council, it goes back to the planning commission, right?
Yeah, that's right. And
so there will be opportunity to comment.
Oh,
it doesn't
absolutely.
necessarily mean there's opportunity to really change it.
Well, I think there may be opportunity because
they
get changed, but not only that, what's happening now. So in Williamsburg, for example, they've gotten approval from, they've gotten comment, I forget what that was, from the community board. It's also gone through the borough president's office. Now it's going to the city council, as is the West Side plan.
So it's in ULURP, or is it?
It's already going through ULURP, and the city council hearings are going to be happening this winter and spring.
Oh, good. So people should watch for that.
Absolutely. It's going to be a big story. And it already is. I mean, if you go to these hearings in Williamsburg, they had hundreds of people packing school auditoriums who were really engaged, mobilized around this, very concerned about what it meant for their communities, both the new high-rise development and also the affordable housing question. Yeah. So the city council actually has a lot of bargaining power. They have the power to scuttle it, and the city planning department and HPD, the Housing Preservation and Development Agency, are both going to have to take very seriously what the city council wants.
Are you going to put notice of the meetings on your website?
I think we will.
All right, so we will have to look at that again, and it's citylimits.org.
Citylimits.org.
What do you think of, you also teach journalism?
That's right. I teach at Hunter College and at New York University.
And what do you teach? What is the point, or what is your subject exactly?
Well, at Hunter College, it's been basic reporting. I teach undergraduates who are media majors, who many of whom are not even intending to be journalists. And I find this a lot of fun because you really get to immerse students in the ethos of journalism, in critical, independent thinking, and in covering their own neighborhoods. And it's the focus is really look at the world around you, understand what's happening.
We're almost finished with this program, if we can imagine. What do you think the other media, what do you call the regular media?
Oh, I call it the commercial media.
The commercial media.
That's what I call it.
What do you think they should do? I mean, should they take lessons from something like City Limits?
I think they do, if I can be so bold. I mean, I think they look for stories that we do.
I agree with you. I think it's a big source of information for.
That's one of our goals. I really, they're in a bit of a box right now because they're trying to work with what they think their readers already know and are already interested in. And what you tend to end up with then is really just kind of basic coverage of issues that affect everyone, of education, the subways, 9/11, fires,
What bothers me is you listen to WINS on the radio, and then you read it, or you read it in the paper in the morning, and then you hear it on the radio. I mean, it just gets repeated. It's the same news that everybody uses.
Well, that's because the owners don't want to invest a lot of money in reporting, and so it's easy
you're
just to
providing
kind of,
it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a precious commodity, and the whole business of journalism is being increasingly defunded right now. It's a real kind of critical moment for the future, I think, of independent inquiry and information.
And you become almost a substitute for, not really, but you're trying in a way, if every neighborhood had its own local newspaper, you would be the summary.
That's one way of looking at it, but we try to do something the local newspapers aren't really equipped or driven, it's not in their mission to really do, which is we try to paint the big picture. They're reporting on stories about what's happening on this corner, what's happening at this community group. What we're trying to do is connect the dots. And I think it's a really important service. People get very focused on whatever little band, whether it's their neighborhood or their industry or their profession, whatever their set of concerns are, and to really improve communities and really engage people in a civic dialogue, you have to be able to bring people together around common themes, common principles, and opportunities for action. So I think that's what we try to do.
And you're trying really, in a way, also to empower the people who don't have the power of money. I mean, to bring the issues that are so important to ensure the mix of New York City.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really at the heart of what we're doing, and knowing that, yes, there are some of our readers are people who are who find us on the web or find us on the newsstand and are personally affected by the stuff we cover, but we really try to connect with advocacy groups, activists, people who are really trying to improve their communities.
And I think you do a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you.
And people should look for this on the newsstand next month, not necessarily this month. Go on the internet, look at citylimits.org, and become more familiar with some of the really important problems of the city. Thank you, Alyssa Katz.
Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you.